One was attracted to poor Miss Webster, not so much by what she was as by what she was meant to be. What she was, always just failing to be, and it struck me now that her attitude, as we sat together on the terrace of the hotel overlooking a huge expanse of blue Mediterranean, was typical of the failure that she was, for she sat with her head drooped a little to one side in an attitude of one who has been crying, and her hands lay empty on her lap. Yes, that was the impression. Her hands were not merely resting, they were empty, as if, I said to myself, the cup of life had been snatched from them. It was not that Miss Webster had no interests. She had many. Music, painting, embroidery, architecture. In all these things she was interested in her dry, prim way. She even did a little harmless sketching herself. But when she spoke of these hobbies, one was aware of something cold and impersonal. One might almost say something tasteless in her appreciation, as though the salt of life had been left out of it. And indeed, it seemed, in other respects, as if life did not interest her. For of people, animals, flowers, the open, physical out-of-doors, she seldom spoke. I tried to picture Miss Webster in love, Miss Webster bathing in the Mediterranean, even Miss Webster dancing a pas seul. It could not be done. The impulse which instigates such things had, one felt, had been dried out of her. My thoughts turned inevitably to old Mrs. Webster. She had not left her room all day, and I found myself wondering if Miss Webster's lot was perhaps a little happier on such days, when she had at least a few small intervals of respite, even though the continual running to and fro from her mother's room was more tiring than simply talking or reading to her on the terrace. And suddenly I felt angry with the domineering, selfish old invalid who had reduced Miss Webster to what she was. If only old Mrs. Webster would die, I thought, perhaps even yet Miss Webster might regain her lost humanity. And then I went on to wonder if Miss Webster never wished, if only involuntarily, in her heart of hearts, that old Mrs. Webster would die. I almost hoped she did. At least, I decided grimly, it would be a sign of grace, a sign that her smothered personality was still alive, and I longed to have a glimpse into the mind of the poor thwarted creature. As if in answer to my wish, Miss Webster just then looked up, caught my eye, and glanced timidly aside. "I had such a curious dream last night," she began in her faded voice, "and so vivid that when I woke I could have sketched the scene of it in every detail. I dreamt that I was mounting a wide stone stair leading to sort of an open loggia. You know Florence? The Bargello? Well, it was something like the stair and the Bargello. When I reached the top I saw in an alcove to the right a nun seated at a table on which was an illuminated manuscript. I knew somehow that she was the Mother Superior, but I paid no more attention to her because there was a little Gothic door on my left which attracted me. It was ajar, so I pushed it open and went in. I found myself in a low stone-vaulted room with beautiful stained-glass windows. On stools and tables and chairs lay a great profusion of illuminated manuscripts, the most lovely things you ever saw, and I went from one to the other. I felt that illuminating was what I had always wanted to do. A large black crucifix, which rather frightened me, hung between the windows, and the walls were covered with tapestries, each an intricate web of lovely flower designs, so minute, so perfect, that I could see them still. Among the other furniture I noticed a black cabinet full of little drawers. I went over to it and pulled out a drawer. It was full of butterflies, carefully arranged and labeled,
and as I opened drawer after drawer, I found that they all contained those butterflies. Gorgeous, unknown kinds more beautiful than any I'd ever seen.
But how sad, Miss Webster, I said.
Sad?
Said Miss Webster.
Why sad?
Why? Because your butterflies were all dead, and your flowers all woven flowers, and your room low and stone-vaulted. I wish they had been living butterflies, fluttering among real flowers in a sunny garden. Miss Webster laughed her timid laugh.
How absurd you are, she said. What difference can it make? It was only a dream. Well, I looked at the butterflies for a long time, and at the illuminated manuscripts too, and then I saw a door which I had not previously noticed near the window. I tried it. It was open. It was so low that I had to stoop as I went through it. Inside was a chapel, and there was an altar at the far end of it, and on the floor in front of the altar lay, what do you think?
A stuffed bird of paradise?
I said, no, an open coffin with the young monk in it.
Oh, my dear Miss Webster, I exclaimed, but how awful.
No, said Miss Webster, it wasn't so very awful, you see, because he was alive.
Alive, Miss Webster? And what did he look like?
I don't know, said Miss Webster. I couldn't see because his face was turned away from me.
Then how do you know he was young?
You keep speaking as though the thing were real. I know because, I just knew as one does in dreams. After that I returned into the larger room.
Leaving your young man?
Leaving the monk, and crossing into the larger room, I came out again onto the loggia.
Where your mother was?
My mother? You mean the Mother Superior?
To be sure, the Mother Superior.
Yes, and the Mother Superior was still there in the alcove, and I thought that I would go see what she was illuminating, but when I got near I saw it really was rather dreadful this time.
You saw that she was signing death warrants?
You keep interrupting, said Miss Webster. No, of course I didn't. I saw that the foot which showed under her robe was a skeleton foot, and when I looked into her face it was the face of a skull.
And you woke up terrified?
No, I was not terrified somehow. On the contrary, I was delighted, and I clapped my hands and shouted out loud, "Then all this belongs to me!"
Including the young man?
The monk. No, by that time I had forgotten the monk.
And then?
And then I woke up. Isn't it curious what things one dreams of?
Very curious, Miss Webster.
But I am sorry you forgot the young man.